What's up guys, this is Voxside. In this tutorial we're gonna cover some different techniques on how to achieve sort of like this sci-fi futuristic look and different HUD design elements. And basically when it comes to this high-tech design, it's basically just a bunch of elements put together. And for example, if I solo some layers here, so we have our floor, we have our clip holders, our main frame, and then we have some different elements for the lines and a bunch of different other HUD design elements that when everything comes together it sort of forms the whole look. And I'm gonna break this project apart, and let's start with the frame. And by the way, if you want to check out this exact same project file, be sure to check the download link in the description of this video. So now we can get started, and let's create a new composition. I'll make this full HD and 100 frames should be alright. And let's start with the main frame of the video. And going back here, let's name this main tutorial. Alright, and we can get started with the frame. So I will create a new solid by pressing Ctrl Y on my keyboard. Okay, and then I will go to my rectangle mask and double click to create a mask, and I will set this mask to subtract. So what you can do here is, if you double click an anchor point on the mask, you will select the whole, you will have the whole mask selected. And now if I hold Ctrl and Shift, you can see we are starting to scale this down uniformly. So now I want to pre-compose this layer. So I will select this layer, press Ctrl Shift C for pre-compose, and I will name this new comp frame 2, hit OK. And now we've created a new comp, and I can double click this to access it. But first I will go back in my main tutorial comp, and I will lock this comp viewer, and if I press on this little arrow over here, I can make a new comp viewer. Alright, and now if I go inside my frame 2, now we have both of these compositions seen at the same time. And what I want to do with this second composition that we've created, so frame 2, I can go to composition, composition settings, and I will split the width and height in 2. So I'll divide this by 2 and also the height by 2. Alright, and what I want to do now is grab this layer, this solid that we have with the mask. And while having Ctrl and Shift selected, I will drag this over until it sort of aligns perfectly with the corner over here. Alright, and now back in my main tutorial, I can select this pre-composed layer, so frame 2, and move it over to the side until it also snaps and lines up perfectly with the corner. And now if I go to Effect while having the layer selected, I can go to Stylize, Motion Tile, and I will set the output width and height to 300, and I will turn on mirror edges. Alright, so what I'm essentially doing, this setup is all about, is if I go back in my frame 2 and modify anything here, it will update over here and sort of fill out the entire rectangle area. Alright, so you can kind of see as I'm doing any adjustments to this quarter of the mask, it updates on the whole rectangle frame in the original main tutorial comp. Alright, and now we can start drawing some shapes and creating some interesting design. Alright, and now I can select this layer and create a new mask. So I'll grab my pen tool, and if I want to draw a straight line, I can hold Shift, and this will just sort of create a straight line. And I've created a new mask, and this new mask I can set to subtract. And you can kind of see now the effect that we're getting inside the main composition. Now we can adjust the new mask that we've created and just sort of start building our frame. So that's looking alright, and let's grab our first mask inside the frame 2. Actually, let's name this frame 2. Let's actually set this composition to be frame a quarter, right? So 1 divided by 4. And it's just gonna be easier to keep things organized. Alright, so I'm working on this quarter of the frame, and it will update over to the whole rectangle in the main comp. And with my mask 1 selected, I will grab this edge at the top, And while pressing the up arrow key, you can kind of see we can move edges and points around by using our arrow keys. And if you want to have bigger increments, you can hold down shift while moving and it will move in higher increments, or you can hold down control and it will move in smaller increments, but you can't really see that now because the increments are too small. Alright, so that's just something to keep in mind. You can edit the sort of like the anchor points and the edges with the arrow keys. And let's grab this edge and move it a bit on the top. And let's create a new mask. So I'll grab my rectangle tool. Oh, actually you can see that I didn't have the layer selected, so it created a new mask, a new shape layer. So make sure you have your layer selected. And I will just grab, or actually undo this and hold down shift so the line we create is straight. And you can see how easily it is to just create some interesting shapes, and because this is mirrored over to the other sides, everything updates and it's a lot easier to just work on a quarter of the frame. Alright, and this is looking good, and let's create some more shapes. Let's grab my pen tool, and without having the layer selected, I want to add a new shape layer, and for fill I want to use 50% gray. Alright, and I will create a shape over here, hold down shift, and this will just create a new shape. And if I press U twice while having the layer selected, I can go to path, and if I click on path, then I can access the anchor points and move these around, also by using the arrow keys on the keyboard, like so. And let's create another one over to the side, over to the top part. So grab the pen tool, hold down shift and move to the side by using the arrow keys. Sort of try to make this a straight line. And now we create something that looks like this. Alright, and let's create some more elements. So I will grab my mask tool and let's set a stroke for a value of 2 pixels. And let's create a line that starts from around this place. So something like this. And while having the layer selected, I will press U twice and disable the fill. So I only want the stroke. And you can see how this looks in the main comp. Let's adjust the path a bit. I sort of want to keep the same angles that I'm using throughout the whole design, just for the sake of consistency. Alright, seems to be looking good. And let's add another line, maybe that goes something like in this fashion, right? So I will deselect this layer, press G for my mask, my pen tool, and then I can start drawing another line that goes something like this. And press U twice, disable the fill, go to my path property and just sort of move the edges around and try to fix up the design a bit. And I can see how it looks here in the main comp. Oh, undo that. Alright, so that's looking pretty good, and let's create a few more shapes. So I'll grab my rectangle mask tool and I can draw a rectangle over here, and let's go to fill actually and make this 100% white. Sort of want this to be a little bit thinner and move it to the side with the arrow keys. Let's grab another, actually let's make another rectangle at the top. Alright, so we end up with something that looks like this. And let's do one final thing to add a little bit more detail. Let's grab our rectangle tool and let's draw some random rectangles that cover parts of our sort of like our wires. Alright, so something like this. And now if I grab this layer that has all of the rectangles, I can set it to be silhouette alpha, and you can kind of see it's using our rectangles to cut parts out of our design. So this layer will affect all of the layers below it. And the fun thing that you can do here is if you select this layer and press T for opacity and set it to 50%, you can see now it only influences it by half. And we're sort of creating some interesting breaking up in the pattern of our sort of like our circuits, alright, which will look a lot better in our original frame. Alright, so I'm pretty satisfied with how this frame looks, and I can unlock this comp now and get rid of this guy, and we can only work in our main tutorial comp now. And let's grab our frame, press F4 and make this 3D. And let's go to our project, and I will drop my stock image that I have prepared for this tutorial, and I'm just gonna scale this. And I actually want to pre-compose this layer now, so Control Shift C, and I will name this media holder, let's say tutorial. Alright, and also make this a 3D layer. And now I can go to layer, new camera. I will use an angle view of 90 degrees. And right away I want to add a null object to this composition, and let's rename this to let's rename this null object to camera target, and I will parent this camera to the camera target null, and make sure the camera target is selected, is 3D, and now I can grab my camera, press C for camera controls, and switch to my track Z camera tool. You can switch through the camera tools by pressing C. Now I will just zoom this out, and actually you can see we're having a slight problem with the frame, and we can easily fix this if we just let's actually turn off 3D for these layers, and I will pre-compose this a frame again, and I will name this main frame tutorial. And then if I make them 3D again, you can see that gets rid of the sort of like the motion tile error that we were getting earlier. And now with my camera target selected, I can go to my rotation tools, and that's R on your keyboard, and I can sort of rotate this around, and you can see now we can easily create the animation that you've seen in the beginning of the video. So I'll set a keyframe for the Y rotation at the beginning, move towards the end, and set another keyframe over to the side, and we really easily just created the sort of animation that you've seen in the preview. And I can also maybe tilt the camera a bit by changing the Z rotation, just to create the more interesting angle and effect. Alright, let's actually increase the keyframe values for my Y rotation. So that's looking good, and let's go ahead and add a background. So Control Y for new layer, name this BG, and I don't want this to be 3D. I can go to Effect, Generate, for color gradient, and let's use some different shades of blue and maybe a little bit of green. So I think that's looking alright. Let's increase the blend, and I will go ahead and add a curves to this as well, and just sort of darken everything up. And I will duplicate this layer, so Control D, delete these effects, and go to my layer, solid settings, and make this a black layer, and I can create a mask for this, maybe something like this. And if I press F and go to mask feather, I can increase the feather and just sort of create a gradient in the background. So something like this. Alright, let's go ahead and add a floor. So I'll create a new layer, name this floor, make this 3D and flip it over to the side. While having shift selected, you can sort of go in increments of 45 degrees. And then I can drag this down into place, and I will place this below our media holder, so above our BG layers but below everything else. And let's go to scale and increase this, maybe something like this. And let's actually go to my layer settings and make this white. And right away I want to go to my ellipse tool, so I will select this ellipse tool and then double click to create a mask. And then for this mask option I can go to mask feather, increase the feather and decrease the expansion maybe, so we're sort of creating this smooth edge over here. And now I can go to my noise, add a fractal noise, and let's set this to block and the complexity maybe to 1.3, so this looks alright. And let's animate the evolution, so I will hold Alt and click the stopwatch, and then I will add a simple expression, time multiplied by 150. So this will just give our floor a little bit of animation. Alright, and let's see what else we can do with the noise. Let's set the contrast maybe to 35, and let's set the brightness to something like maybe -50. And let's actually go to my channel, my blending modes, and set this to screen. Maybe increase the brightness and decrease the contrast. So this is up to you to find the right balance for your floor. And I can go and add a tritone to this and set this maybe to a blue. So maybe something like this. And let's actually go to my opacity for this layer and set this to maybe 60%. And let's duplicate this layer. I will set this new layer to add and 100%, and I will solo this just so I can get some work for this layer. And let's actually duplicate this layer again. I will delete all the effects for this layer, and I will set this layer to be Luma matte for my floor that we've created above it. And I will press M and delete this mask because we don't need it. Alright, so this just sort of ensures a smoother transition right here on the edge. And let's turn off my tritone, and let's add a stylize find edges, and I will set this to invert, and then I can turn back my tritone and you can kind of see the effect we're getting. And let's go to color correction, curves, and I will unsolo this layer and see what exactly we're doing over here. And maybe increase the curves, contrast a bit, and let's go to transform, just make this overall smaller scale. Alright, so maybe something like this. And I will solo this again, and I will go to effect and add a fast blur to this, and I will set this to be horizontal and increase the value. And I will also just increase maybe the contrast a bit, and I want to add a glow to this as well, so glow, and decrease the threshold. And I can also set this to be horizontal and maybe increase the value a bit, or actually I'm just gonna leave this as horizontal and vertical. Alright, so unsolo this, and if I grab both of these layers and duplicate these layers, I can go to my new duplicate and set this fast blur to be vertical for this one. Alright, so now we're sort of creating some nice glowing edges for our floor. Alright, so that's looking fine, and let's see what we can do next. Let's take a look. So let's actually create sort of like these lines on top over here which are animating. So this line here is probably gonna be the hardest part of the tutorial, so I hope I can explain it properly, and hopefully you will be able to follow along. So let's create a new composition, and I will name this abstract line 1 maybe, and for width I want to use 50 and height let's say 1000. Alright, and let's grab our pen tool, and I will sort of create a line right on the middle of the screen, and we can turn on title safe to sort of ensure that our line is right in the center of our composition. And I will set the stroke to be 2. Alright, and I want to duplicate this shape, so Ctrl D, and then Ctrl Shift C to pre-compose the new duplicate, and I will name this animated sprites. Alright, so inside this composition now, I will go to composition settings for animated sprites, and we will set the width to be 5. Alright, so now with this layer selected, I can go to contents, click on add, and I will add a trim paps to this. And for trim paths, I will set the start value to be 90%. Alright, and if I turn my title safe action off, you can kind of see what trim paths does. It's basically does exactly what it says. It's trimming the paths based on the spline that it's on, or rather the shape. So I'll set this start value to 90%, and I want to move these. I want to move sort of like this segment to be in the middle of our screen. So let's turn on back title safe action. Alright, so here you can see we have the middle of the screen, and I will just grab this layer, and while holding shift selected I can just use the arrow keys to just move this forward, upwards, and until it's just sort of right in the center of our screen. And I will disable title safe action now. Alright, so with this element now I want to create sort of like this automatic animation of this element going up and down. And we can do this by using a wiggle expression, but to use this wiggle expression inside the position values, we need a expression control for this. So with the layer selected, I will go to Effect, Expression Controls, and I will use a slider. And then if I Alt and click the slider stopwatch, I can add a wiggle. So I will use wiggle 0.5, which is the frequency, so how fast it goes up and down. And for my amplitude, I want to use 750. Alright, so now we want to parent this value to our Y position. So with the layer selected, I will press U, and this will give my slider control. And while holding down Shift and pressing P, we can also bring out our position value. And I will Alt and click my stopwatch for position, and I will type value, which is the original value that we have now. Open and close brackets, and inside the brackets I will type 0, comma, and then I will peak whip the slider value like so. And you can see now as I scrub my timeline that the element is moving up and down. And if I duplicate this layer now, so let's say I make like 10 duplicates, you can see we're sort of having this random animation with different elements. Alright, so let's delete the duplicates. So here we have our original layer, and what I want to do now is actually each time I duplicate, I want this layer to have a different value for opacity. So I will go to my opacity settings, so T, and I will add an expression to this, so Alt and click my stopwatch, and I will type seed random, and open and close parentheses, and type 1 and true. And I will explain what this does in a second. And then I will type random, open and close brackets, and let's say I want a random value between maybe 25 and 100. Alright, so each time I duplicate the layer, it will give me a random value between 25 and 100. And what seed random does is gonna take the random value that is generated with this code, with this line over here, and it will just keep it throughout the whole timeline. So if you don't have this seed random, the value that the random line generates will just change every frame. So it's very important that if you want to hold down a specific value, you add a seed random to your expression, right? And now you can see we have a value of 25%, and if I duplicate this layer a bunch of times, you can kind of see each layer will have a different value. Alright, but I will actually delete these layers, and I want to add a final expression to our stroke. So if I go to contents, shape, stroke, and width, I also want to have a random value of width between 1 and 5 each time I duplicate the layer. So I will do the same thing that we've done for the opacity, only do it for our stroke. So I will add an expression to this, seed random, open and close parentheses, 1, true. And for our random, I want to generate a random value between 1 and 5. Alright, So now whenever I duplicate this layer, we will have a random opacity and a random width between 1 and 5, and also some random movement because of our wiggle expression. And for trim paths, I also want for the start value a random value between 90 and 99. Alright, so I'll do the same thing, add an expression, seed, random, 1 true, and random value between 90 and 99. Alright, so now if I duplicate this, we should be getting a lot of different variations of the same element. So some are smaller, some are thicker, some are thinner, some are less opaque, and they're all moving differently. So that's creating a bunch of different animations, all by using just one layer. Alright, so you can go as crazy as you want. You can make even more duplicates if you want to use more detail. So that's probably the hardest part of this tutorial, making these abstract lines. So let's go back now in my original abstract line comp, and let's disable title safe action, and I will set this original shape layer to be maybe an opacity of maybe 15%, and I will create just 2 circles around the edges over here on the top and bottom. So I'll grab my my elliptical tool and hold down Control and Shift and just drag it out and move it up a bit, and then I will Control D, and I can hold down Shift and the downwards key and just move it over to the bottom portion. Let's take a look. Alright, so this is pretty much how you create the lines. And let's go back in my main tutorial and let's drop the line. So abstract line 1, let's make this 3D, and let's reposition this and sort of flip it, and then I can increase the scale just so it's the same width as our frame, and I can set this to maybe screen, and now I can duplicate this layer and move this down, turn this around, and just move it to the side, decrease the scale, alright, and duplicate this again, move it over to the other side as well. And let's take a look. Alright, so not bad. Let's actually take a look at what we can do for this clip holder to make it more interesting. So let's go to my media holder and let's actually add a solid layer to this, and I will do the same thing we did with the floor. So I'll add a fractal noise, set it to block, decrease the contrast, set the complexity to 1.3 maybe, and maybe increase the scale for this, and set the expression for evolution time multiplied by 150, and I will set this to be soft light, and I want to duplicate this layer now, set this to add, and actually I will solo this and work with just this layer and increase the contrast, and now I can add a stylize, find edges, set this to invert, go to my color correction, tritone, set this to a blue, and I can unsolo this now and maybe decrease the brightness a bit, or decrease the contrast rather, so maybe something like this. And you can see how very easily we can just add sort of like this nice texture to our clips. And I will add another solid, and I will go to generate and select cell pattern, and I will set the disperse for this cell pattern to 0, and I will set the size to maybe 10 and increase the contrast a bit, and I will set this to soft light, and you can see really easily how we can sort of just add a little more detail to sort of like the texture of our clips. And I will set the opacity for this layer to be maybe 35%. And I will go actually in my Fractal Noise and maybe increase the contrast a bit, maybe even add a glow to this layer. Alright, so this will just sort of help fill in the screen a little bit more with some animation. And this should be fine for our clip. Let's take a look what else we have. Alright, so let's see how we can create these lines that come out from the corners. Let's go back here and let's make a new composition. So I will use maybe width 50 and 1000. Oh, I've actually need to create a new composition. So this will be my abstract line 2. So I'll use the same width of 50 and height for 1000. Hit OK. And let's grab our pen tool and create a mask, or rather a path. So maybe something like this. Press U twice and delete the fill. We don't need the fill. Grab our path and just rearrange the shape a bit. So something like this. And I want to create another line. So I'll grab my pen tool again, and for this I want to use a stroke of 1 pixel. And let's start from this part. Hold down Shift and maybe create another sort of like a wire that comes from the other side. Get rid of the fill, and I will set both of these layers to be an opacity of 65%. And for my original layer, I want to duplicate this layer and place this on top. And I will solo this layer for now and set it to 100%. And I want to add a trim paths to this. And for my trim paths, I want to set the start maybe to 95. And you can see if I animate the offset, you can see we're sort of creating this line that follows the path. And we can use this property over here if we add an expression. So the expression will be times time multiplied by negative 150 maybe. So let's see if that's fast enough. Alright, maybe even faster, so 250. So maybe something like this. And let's unsolo this and see how this looks. And maybe we can increase the width of the stroke for this shape to be 3 maybe. And I will also add a effect stylized glow to this. Alright, so this looks fine, and we can add it to our main comp. Let's go to a project, abstract line 2. Set this to screen. And let's actually set the anchor point for this. Let's make this 3D first of all. Alright, and then I will grab my anchor point, and I want to sort of drag it right until the bottom of the composition. So this will be a value of 1000. Alright, and this will just be easier to reposition this and just sort of place it into position. So I'll drag this down. Whoops. Drag this to the side. And then I can flip this by using my rotation tool, so that's W on your keyboard. Alright, and before I duplicate this layer, I want to go to my frame layer and actually add a glow to this layer. So I'll set this to be screen, and I want to go to stylize, glow, and let's set the color A and color B to be sort of like this pale blue. And then for my glow colors, I want to use A and B colors. And then if I increase the radius a bit, you can see we're sort of giving it a nice blue glow to our frame. And I want to copy this glow now for my abstract line 2. And I want to actually maybe increase the scale for this. Sort of reposition this a bit. And maybe if I duplicate this glow, then my abstract line will be more noticeable. And I will duplicate this layer, move it over to the side, and I want to flip this layer. So I will go to my scale, so that's S, disable uniform scale, and set the first value to a negative. And this will just sort of flip it over. And now I can grab both of these layers, Ctrl D to duplicate, place them on top, and I can just easily create the lines at the top. And I want to set these lines maybe to 50% opacity. So 50 and 50, and just use one set of glow for this. So I don't want the top ones to be as noticeable as the ones at the bottom. And let's actually go to the original floor layer and make this just slightly less visible. So now our details pop out a little more. Alright, and let's actually add a reflection for my clip holder. So I will duplicate this clip holder, and I will set the anchor point to be right at the bottom. So I will offset the anchor point right until it hits the edge, and then I can place this into position, and then grab my rotation tool, and I will just flip this using the X coordinate. Alright, while having a shift selected. And for this guy, I will set both of these to screen, and I want to set the reflection to be, I will add a fast blur to this, just blur this out. And then for my opacity, I can use a lower value, and very easily you can see how we create a reflection. Alright, so in my original example, you can see I sort of have these elements laying around, and I'm gonna go over on how you can build one of them, which is the one with the text, and then you can actually check out how I made the other one. And let's take a look at how we can create one. So let's make a new composition. Let's name this element 1, and I will make this maybe 500 and 250. And let's create a shape with my pen tool. So maybe something like this. And I will duplicate this shape, press U twice, and get rid of my fill. I will set the stroke for this duplicate to be 2. And then for my original shape layer, I can go ahead and add a fractal noise and do the same thing with the block. Complexity 1.3, maybe set the scale to be smaller, and decrease the contrast, of course, and maybe decrease the overall brightness. So we just sort of have this nice background. And let's actually set the stroke to be 1 maybe. And then we can just add a text to this. So I will use some lorem ipsum for this. Just copy paste this, grab my text tool, click to make a new text layer, Control V, and let's actually reposition this. And now I'm just sort of basically trying to format this text and get a nice interesting shape. So this seems to be working fine, and let's animate this text. Let's use an opacity animator, and I will set the opacity to 0, and for range selector I will set the start to be maybe at 26%, make a keyframe, go to the end of my timeline, set another one for 100, and now we're just sort of animating the text over time. And let's set this text to be maybe 50% opacity. Alright, so this is basically how you can create a lot of different shapes, and then you can use these shapes to sort of fill in the main comp. So if I grab my element 1, set this to screen and make this 3D, you can now see if I drag this around, you can kind of really easily duplicate this layer and maybe flip this around and just create some nice interesting shapes, sort of fill up the screen. And you can use a fast blur for the elements that are more in the front plane, and play around with opacity and the scale, of course. And you can see you can very easily start to really shape up your composition and just give it some nice 3D feel by using these elements. So that's up to you. And one final thing that I want to do is use particular to sort of generate, as you can see here, like these random squares. And to do this, all you need is a particular layer. So I'll make a new solid, go to effect, trap code particular, and let's solo this and I will go to my box emitter and spread my particles out. And I will drop this down a bit. And for my particle, I want to use texturized polygon, colorize. And for my texture, I actually set up a texture for the particles. So let's drop this in the composition. So what this texture is basically is just a composition with two shape layers. So at frame 0 we have this whole rectangle fill, and at frame 1 we have a small sort of like this small square. Alright, so I'm gonna use a particular to sort of cycle through these shapes and just use them as textures for our particles. So back inside my main tutorial, let's hide this particle texture composition. We don't need to see this, and with my particular layer selected, I can go to my texture for the particle, and I will set the layer to be PRT text. And for time sampling, this is very important that you set this to be split, clip, and stretch. And you can see now it's using the two frames that we have in our PRT text comp to sort of generate our textures. And I can increase the size now, and increase the size random, and also increase the opacity random, and maybe decrease the overall opacity. And now you can just play around with the settings until you get a satisfying result. Maybe use 25 particles, and for emission extras I will set this to 100. And let's go to my opacity over life, and I want to use this preset that will smooth the transition. And for color, I can use random from gradient, and at color over life I want to use this preset for the gradient. And let's actually desaturate these values a bit for the blue. So maybe something like this. Maybe the size is a little bit too high, and let's actually unsolo this and see how it looks. Alright, so you can kind of see how easily it is to just generate some random shapes. So when everything comes together, all of these smaller elements really make a difference. Alright, so now back in my camera, of course I can turn on my camera depth of field. Set this to on, and let's increase the aperture. And let's see how we can figure out the distance. Maybe increase the blur even more. And let's add a couple of final effects to this whole composition to bring everything together. And actually before that I want to add a new solid layer, and I want to add sort of like this orange highlight over here to sort of compensate all of this blue. So I created a mask, and I can feather this mask out and set this layer to be add, and I will add a generate fill to this layer and set the fill to be this orange, nice orange. And let's go to my opacity, set this to 25%, and I also want to add a wiggle expression to this, to opacity, so I will use 1 and maybe 40. And if I solo this layer, you can see now it sort of flickers and creates a nice highlight on the edge, which works really well with the overall blue look. And I can go to my camera actually and create, let's go to my camera target and press R for rotation and see if we can create a better angle over here. So I think this looks a bit better, and we can even increase the tilt a bit, maybe something like this. Alright, so this looks good, and let's add some final color correction and one final effect. So I'll go to effect, curves, and I added this to an adjustment layer, so that's Control Alt and Y, and I just want to increase the overall contrast a bit and increase the red highlights. Go to my blue channel and increase the blue shadows, and you can see this just brings everything together more nicely. And one final thing I can add is, if I go to distort, optics compensation, I can set this to reverse lens distortion, and if I increase the field of view now, you can kind of see it creates this nice camera distortion, which just helps sell the effect of 3D a lot better. So let's render this out and see how it looks. So this is the final result. Alright, so it's not really amazing, but hopefully with the techniques that I've covered, that you will be able to create more elements and just add a lot more detail to the compositions. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more tutorials, and I'm out.